Good evening. This is a meeting of the Athens Board of Zoning Appeals. The time is 7:02 p.m. and the date is July 9th, 2024. At this point, I will call the meeting to order. The Board of Zoning Appeals currently consists of 5 members and 2 alternates. The alternates are taking part in the discussion and will vote if there is a need to in the absence of another member or when another member abstains for conflict of interest. Members present tonight are Aaron Thomas, Kelly Sauber, Alicia Sweeney, and Paul Isherwood. I'm Rob Delich, the chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Also present and representing the city tonight is Zoning Administrator Mr. David Riggs, and we did this last time too. Thank you very much. So there are 3 cases on tonight's agenda for properties located at 32 West Carpenter Street, 19 Elmwood Place, and 4 Dalton Avenue. The board is required to take testimony under oath. Would anyone wishing to speak tonight concerning any item on the agenda, please stand. Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you will present to the board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. So now I'd like you to watch a short video about the rules of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
The Athens Board of Zoning Appeals operates according under the following procedure. The chair will name and describe the case. The zoning administrator or secretary will state the basis of the objection and any applicable facts or conditions pertaining to the case. The appellant or their representative will give reason why the appeal should be viewed favorably. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the request will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in general comment will be heard. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition will be heard. If necessary, the appellant or their representative will offer concluding summary or rebuttal remarks. Testimony from the floor shall be closed. The board will deliberate and render a decision. According to Athens City Code Section 23-07-03B, the board has power to grant variances from the strict application of the code, provided the variance will not be contrary to the public interest. The spirit of the code is observed, public safety and welfare are secured, and substantial justice is done. According to Athens City Code Section 23-07-10C, variances from the code shall not be granted unless the board makes specific findings of fact based directly on the particular evidence presented to it, that the standards and conditions imposed in this title, if applicable, have been met by the applicant. Exceptional circumstances. There are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question or to the intended use of the property that does not apply generally to other properties or classes or uses in the same zone. Practical difficulty and undue hardship. Because of exceptional or extraordinary conditions pertaining to the specific piece of property, a literal enforcement of these regulations will result in practical difficulty or undue hardship that is unnecessary to the achievement of public purposes. Preservation of equal property rights. Literal interpretation of these regulations would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same zone and the same vicinity, while a granting of the requested variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied to other properties in the same zone and the same vicinity. Minimum variance. The variance granted is the minimum variance required to make possible the reasonable use of the property. Absence of detriment. The authorizing of such variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and will not materially impair the purpose of the zoning code or the public interest. Not a general nature. The condition or situation of the specific piece of property or the intended use of said property for which variance is sought, one or the other or in a combination, is not of so general or recurrent a nature as to make reasonably practicable the formulation of a general regulation for such condition or situation. Any person, resident, or officer, department, or appointed body of the City of Athens, aggrieved by a decision of the board, may petition the Athens County Court of Common Pleas concerning the illegality of the decision. Such petition must be filed within 30 days after the mailing of the decision of the board to the applicant.
All right. Thanks for watching the video, and that's basically how we function. One thing I didn't mention specifically is we do have alternates. Two of them are here tonight, and they are going to be full voting members tonight because we have two normal voting members that are absent tonight. So we have a full suite of 5 voting members tonight. Our first case on the agenda is case number 24-06V at 32 West Carpenter Street. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.10.01, Table A, to allow 0-foot rear setback where 40 feet is required, and 88% lot coverage where 40% maximum is required, and 90% total lot coverage where 60% maximum is required. Director Riggs, will you provide us with your overview?
Yeah, this is the Mount Zion church that they're doing some improvements to. This is an old historic church, and I'm really happy to see it's being restored. What they want to do is they want to have make it accessible. So they need to install an elevator. Of course, they didn't have that back in the day when the building was built. So they're going to extend the back of the building behind Carpenter to the property line so that they can install an elevator in the back so that they can get access for folks that can't make the stairs.
So is that the main thing that triggered this? That expansion is what triggered this?
My understanding,
request?
that's the reason they're putting that extension on the back of the building is primarily for the elevator and access to the elevator.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Riggs before we move to the appellant? No. All right. Would the appellant please approach the podium and introduce themselves?
I'm Richard Schultz. I'm on the building committee. I'm also a local architect. And David's right about the elevator. For us to go back 5+ feet to the property line also allows us to install handicap restrooms at the lower level and a unisex restroom at the main floor. Also provides for a mechanical room in the space. So it's critical to expansion. Saying that we're fortunate, it's an understatement that we received a $7 million grant and $1 million goes to the restoration of the stained glass windows. The rest goes to improving the building. So it's pretty exciting for us.
Sounds good. Do you have any other pertinent testimony or reasons why we should view this request favorably?
Well, as David said, it's a historic building. It really means quite a bit to the community, both to the Black community and the university community. It's the opportunity to preserve a building and to increase the use.
All right, any questions for the appellant?
You have a letter of support on the adjoining property owner too.
Yes. So it's in the record that's being distributed, but maybe mentioning that, yes, is good to. So this is a letter from Brian Wharton, 92 North Congress, property owner adjoining on the
North side.
north side. On the north side, university off-campus housing. I'll just read it briefly, I guess. And to whom it may concern, as the owner of the property to the north of Mount Zion Church, I am in support of the proposed remodels that they're wanting to do. I have seen the construction plans, and we have agreed that should any reconstruction be needed on a wall I own that is on the property line will be needed, they are going to complete that. I have no problem with any setback requirements not being met between the two properties because of the addition of an elevator. I am just happy to see it finally come to life again, as I'm sure most of the community is. All right, is that the only letter we have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That we know of.
Any questions for the appellant? All right,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, I want to ask if there's anyone present wishing to speak in favor of the request. We just read one favorable request statement. Anybody else would like to speak in favor of this request? Come forward and state your name and your address. And
My name's Alan Swank, 40 Townsend Place, member of Athens City Council. 2 points I'd like to make tonight in support of this. The new title of this building, and it's more than a building, includes the words cultural center. And that's exactly what this is going to be. A recognition of a culture long, not in the forefront of many people's minds, but a cultural center that will open its doors to everybody in this town. A town that prides itself on community, coming together, and doing things for a common purpose. The second point I'd like to make is that City Council has already acted on this in a connected way. In early May, Council passed Ordinance 03224 to grant an easement request to allow ADA parking, much like we have, not parking, ADA access, much like we have at the Methodist Church, where when people come off of Carpenter and turn onto Congress, they can literally turn in a little loop, drop the passengers off, and then exit onto Congress. This drop-off will be very close to the proposed walkway, which will take people to the elevator. We often talk about inclusiveness based on race, creed, color, but here's an opportunity to be truly inclusive, to include those who come with disabilities and challenges for the stairs in that building and in the other building. And I would encourage this body to consider this and certainly grant the request of the applicant. Thank you.
would anyone else like to speak in support? Okay. Anyone wishing to speak in general comment? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to close the floor. I guess one more thing is, does the appellant have anything they'd like to add at this point? Usually it's a rebuttal. We don't have any opposition here, but.
I'm happy with the comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to close the floor, and then the board here will deliberate and so any questions or any discussion amongst ourselves before we move into the questions?
Now, this it kind of goes hand in hand to what the city passed in May with the cutout for the pull-in, so.
I had a general question. Is it required to be up to ADA code with all of the changes that are happening with the building?
That might be, the architect might be able to answer that. I don't think it's required, but.
Yes, please. Sure.
Under the Ohio Building Code, you're required to make improvements, accessibility improvements. If you were building a totally new building, you'd be required to meet all the ADA requirements of accessibility, including parking and access ways. When you renovate a building, there's a thing in the code that you make it's not quite the verbiage, make your best attempt, and you're expected to spend 20% of your construction budget on this.
Okay.
But, so you are required to do it. never enters people's minds anymore when you do this, not to do it, hopefully. So, yeah, so we're required.
Yeah, thank you.
Reasonable accommodation.
Yeah, reasonable.
All right, so I guess the one thing maybe just to talk about before we go into the questions is there's three things we're talking about here is a rear setback of 0 feet where 40 feet is required, the 88% lot coverage where 40% is required, and 90% total lot coverage where 60% is required. This property is an old property and clearly was built long before there were restrictions like these in place. And it's sort of amazing to me still, you can find many examples in Athens where you can't rebuild what you had because the code is too restrictive. And that's why we're here, I think, ultimately because we're the opportunity to make an exception. And
The adjoining property owner already kind of gave permission to actually come in closer to their property already.
the other thing that's going on is the city has made some changes to code or has proposed changes to code. The Planning Commission has proposed them, and I think they're coming before City Council soon. I don't remember, maybe you can refresh my memory on this, if they apply in this kind of R3 zone or if those are more R1, R2 changes?
It goes across all of the, we looked at all of the zones. For all three of these cases that we have tonight, that those proposed changes were in effect, they'd still need to come to see the board tonight. So all three of those those changes aren't enough to not require variance for these three cases.
Yeah, I think that moving it from like 40% to 60% coverage was one of the changes.
Yep.
What's the back setback that's proposed with
I
the
think
new?
they've changed that to 5. The side setbacks, front setback has changed. The minimum lot width has changed. These are all recommendations for changes, right? So building height has changed in most of the zones because we'd like to see vertical construction instead of horizontal construction. So trying to make it more modern.
All right. Any other questions or discussion? Okay, so let's go through the questions. Are there exceptional circumstances?
Yeah.
The building's been
It's a
there.
historic building, right?
They can't comply with the zones already, so,
Yeah.
And they have no handicap accessibility on the higher floors.
yeah.
And that's really the trigger here. And so they're not just renovating to make the building prettier or something, but they're making it more functional.
More functional.
And that's an important piece of this, and that's really what triggered this request, right? So
Yeah.
so I think, yes, exceptional circumstances. Is there practical difficulty and undue hardship? Conditions pertaining to the specific piece of property. I think the fact that it's a building with a large footprint on a small parcel is rather exceptional. It's right in the center of town. And so it's part of the old part of town as well. So I think that those are factors here that make it difficult and to do anything else with this property. I mean, they really couldn't do much here and be within code restriction.
Right.
So a literal enforcement of these regulations would result in practical difficulty or undue hardship.
On a
Anybody
large
disagree?
percentage of the population that are handicapped,
Right.
I would say yes.
Preservation of equal property rights. So would the literal interpretation of these regulations deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same zone? Well, I didn't really look at this exactly, but imagine there's other buildings there in the area that also have large footprints.
Plus they're getting support from the neighbors too, so
Yeah.
that kind of helps out. But it's basically comparable to what the temple is next door. Sonic Temple, which is locked down.
Sonic Temple, the Southeast Ohio History Center is probably in the same situation as well. All right, minimum variance. I don't know if there's much we can say about that.
Yeah.
These are big variances,
Right.
but I think
These are big variances.
it has to be this way, I think, to do what needs to be done on this property. So
But yeah, they're not building
think
a
we can all-
lavish, very large, ginormous elevator. They're building a reasonably sized elevator.
Right, to make reasonable use of the property. So I think within reason, it seems minimum, even though the numbers are large, I guess you could say, compared to what's allowed here normally.
And they're
so-
already exceeding the lot coverage.
They already are exceeding.
They
Yeah.
already are.
Currently.
Right.
Yeah,
It's not, this
exactly.
new piece isn't going to make that much different, really. Yeah. Absence of detriment. So we've heard one joining property member in support and have not heard any in opposition. So I don't think there's any detriment to any of the adjoining property owners. Not of a general nature, condition or situation of the specific piece of property is not of so general nature or recurrent as to make reasonably practical the formulation of a general regulation. I don't think there's anything here for that makes any sense. So I'd say it's not of a general nature. Someone from the board like to propose a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to grant a variance from ACC 23.10.01 for property located at 32 West Carpenter Street for 0-foot rear setback where 40 feet is required, 88% lot coverage where 40% max is required, and 90% total lot coverage where 60% max is required.
Second.
Thank you for a second. All right, all those in favor, please raise your right hand.
Sorry, Rob.
Kelly always uses his left hand. Okay, we have 5 votes for and none opposed, so you have your variance.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right. So our next case on the agenda is case number 24-07V at 19 Elmwood Place. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.03.11A1 to allow a 2-foot setback where 5 feet is required. So Director Riggs, would you like to give us your brief?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so they've got an existing garage on this property, and they want to basically relocate it, and they've got some reasons why they want to do that. It's almost the same footprint. It's just a little bit larger than the existing garage, but they are going to move it closer to the back lot line as indicated.
Move it closer, but the existing garage is actually like right on the property line.
It is, yeah.
So essentially, they're improving the setback a little bit, 2 feet off the line from where it is now.
On one side, yeah.
On one side, okay.
So they had to basically come, because they're demolishing the garage completely and rebuilding the new garage. They had to come to get the
Yeah,
variance.
they're actually set on top of each other, so they'd have to demolish the first building before they could put the second one on.
And that's why we're here. That triggered this change. If they could have rebuilt the garage in
Right.
place, refurbished it or whatever, it wouldn't have
Wouldn't be
triggered
here,
this,
yeah.
right? Okay. Any other questions for Director Riggs? Yes. At this time, I'd like to invite the appellant or the representative to please approach the podium, provide any pertinent information, testimony, reasons why we should approve this.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Josh Baer. I'm a resident and property owner with my wife. Thanks for having me. I have to say, going second is tough because it was a very compelling first case. So I really appreciate having the opportunity and hope I'll still get due consideration. So as Director Riggs mentioned, we have a very old garage, and I talked to some folks about renovating it, and it's not really a reasonable option. It's falling over. I'll bring some pictures up in a second for you as well. And it's built 2 feet from my west property line. And behind it, there's 20 feet of unused space on my property. That it's north facing, so it's damp. There's a ton of mosquitoes. and it's got poor drainage. And so what I want to do is move the garage back 15 feet. So I'll still maintain the minimum required setback from the north property line. And I just want to keep the exact same setback that currently exists from the west property line. And so, again, if I could rebuild it, it would be right there, but I think it makes sense to move it back. I'm going to increase the depth a little bit to match the size of modern cars, and that sort of thing. The reasons for requesting the variance instead of just moving it over, I think there are a couple, and related to what I understand your sort of specific criteria are. In terms of equal property rights, I think it's very common to have variances on the setback. And I'll show you, there's a picture on my north property line. My neighbor there built their garage literally on our property line, which is completely fine. But it's not even just within the neighborhood. It's on the property there. But really more, I think it's absence of detriment. I think you received, I can bring up a letter from the neighbor on the west, Heath or James Hutchinson, who's supportive of the project, and he's the one that I'll be building close to. And then finally, I think a little bit of extenuating circumstances, and I would argue actually partly absence of detriment as well. We have this really beautiful old, 100-plus-year-old elm, a walnut hybrid tree that's actually apparently on like one of the botany circles and stuff, and it's right in the middle of our lot. But it's got this big surface root that's currently growing, and it's pushing up the driveway as it approaches the garage. And so if we, by building to the left, we're going to shrink the size of the carport, I guess, a little bit, and we'll be able to drive around the surface root. My goal is to avoid doing any damage to the root and any damage to the tree, and so I think not doing that would be a detriment, because I think it's a benefit to the community, or at least to the immediate neighbors, right? Yeah, anyway, I think those are the main things. I'll just bring up the pictures.
So it's hard to see, but this one shows the part of the roof pushing out the driveway. That's my neighbor's garage on the property line. This is the building that's next to it. This is the setback that's currently there, so just hold it.
Yeah. So the neighbor's garage, that looks pretty new.
Yeah, I didn't, I talked to them a little bit about this. I don't know them well enough to have asked them for a letter of support, but they seemed super friendly about it. I do think it's new. I didn't look up on whether they received a variance or not. I assume they did.
This one, Josh, in B, is that your rear neighbor?
Exactly, that's the north neighbor, yeah.
Don't see a letter of support in the documents.
It's an extra email. We will email it
That's what
after.
we just got today, yeah.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
Here, letter of support. Jonathan, from Jonathan? Yeah.
Okay, tell you
Yeah,
what,
that just came
I'll
today.
read this into the record when we come to that part of the meeting here.
Yeah, this just came this afternoon.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
All right, any questions for the appellant?
So we got 2 emails.
Trying to think where I say this, maybe it's now. I can attest to the condition of this garage. I looked at buying this property 7 years ago. So I remember my realtor specifically said, probably can't save this garage. It's going to need to be torn down. And then you're going to trigger exactly what we're here for today, a variance. So I'm aware this garage needed probably to be replaced 7 years ago even. So that seems understandable.
Yeah, it's a 3-car. The double door garage doesn't open at all. Or the double wide door is not usable. And the other one, we rebuilt the bottom because it had completely rotten off. And so right now it's modestly usable.
Right. All right. Any other questions for the opponent? All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So is there anyone present wishing to speak in favor of the request? read that?
Oh, yeah.
So we'll read the email letter came in today.
Letter from Jonathan Hutchinson. Athens Board of Zoning of Appeals. I'm writing support of my neighbors, Josh and Yami of 19 Elwood Place. They are requesting to move their garage with a setback of only 2 feet from my property at 237 East State Street. While the minimum requirement setback is 5 feet, I believe that this variance is justified given the circumstances. The current garage is in a state of disrepair, and the renovation will significantly enhance the safety and intensity of our neighborhood. Moreover, this adjustment will allow for the preservation of a large, beautiful tree situated in the middle of 19 Elmwood Place lot. This tree not only adds to the beauty of our neighborhood, but also provides essential environmental benefits such as shade, habitat for our local wildlife. Additionally, the new garage will be built over an area currently infested by a large mosquito population. I'm hopeful that the improved drainage associated with this new construction will help reduce the mosquito population. I appreciate Josh and Yami's commitment to maintaining the natural landscape and believe the granting this variance will serve the greater good of our community. Thank you for considering my support for this request. Jonathan Hutchinson.
There's a second letter too.
All right. You want to read second letter? Want to read?
I can read it if you want, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Or you could read it off his. If you want.
From Nikki and Fitz Reed, Board of Zoning Appeals, Athens, Ohio. Dear members of the board, we are writing to express our full support for our neighbors Josh and Yamini at 19 Elmwood Place in their request to renovate their garage. While we understand that a variance is being requested to adjust the setback requirement, we are primarily focused on the overall benefits this project will bring to our neighborhood. The current garage is in poor condition, and its renovation will greatly improve the safety and aesthetic of our area. Our child frequently plays in Josh and Yamini's backyard, and we are particularly excited about the enhanced safety that will come with the improved building. Additionally, the reduction in the mosquito population, which is expected from the drainage improvements they are also planning, will make the area more comfortable and healthier for everyone, including our family. We fully support Josh and Yamini's efforts to improve their property and believe that this project will have a positive impact on the neighborhood. Thank you for considering our support for this request sincerely.
All right. Is there anyone else who wants to speak in favor that's here? All right, how about anyone to speak in general comment? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this? All right, so I'm going to close the floor and the board will deliberate. Are there exceptional, well, any comments before we start the questions? Discussion.
No, it's seen as a huge mosquito problem over there.
Yeah, clearly that's part of it. So are there exceptional circumstances? Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions applying to the property in question? The tree is one of those, it seems to me, yeah.
Mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes. Yeah, and aligning the driveway with the garage is also a restraint here as well, and so moving it over much further, it seems, is a problem here.
The fact that they're
That gets
working
into
around the
practical
tree, too.
difficulty, I think, actually. So I'm getting to the next question. So then, is there practical difficulty and undue hardship? And I think that's what I was just getting at, is practical difficulty is aligning the driveway with the garage
In the tree.
and avoiding the tree. Yeah, falls into that, I think, more so than exceptional circumstances.
Undue hardship, you'd have to keep the mosquitoes.
Preservation of equal property rights.
Yeah, considering people behind them just built the garage.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's actually spacing it further from the back property line than it was.
And he's going to maintain the 2-foot setback as it currently exists and stay within the 5 foot from the rear of the property too, so.
He's improving existing conditions.
Yeah, and I think if you were to do a survey in the neighborhood, and I live in the neighborhood, my garage is maybe 6 inches from one property line and 0 on the other. So, and that's a city.
The city lot.
It's a city right away. It's
It was.
0 setback on that.
Most of the east side looked that way. You go
Yeah,
there,
so it's really common for the properties to have already a variance in place just by grandfathering in. And so I think that this, again, yeah, is preserving equal property rights here. Minimum variance. Comments on that? So the rear setback is fine, it's the side setback. That's the question, and
Moving it any further away would,
Put the
Yeah, the
tree in
trees
the-
away,
Right, it would
yeah.
move the trees away.
it would be impractical, essentially,
minimum.
And it's already, there's already an existing building, this building, with that,
with this setback.
yeah.
So it's not moving any closer to the boundary,
Yeah.
it's the same. Yeah, okay. Absence of detriment. So we have 2 letters of support. I don't hear any opposition, so it doesn't seem to be any detriment here. In fact, benefits to the neighbors potentially. All right. Not of a general nature. Don't see anything here that seems too general to me.
I hate that question.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? So would someone from the board like to propose a motion?
I'll make a motion.
All right.
All right, I make a motion that we grant the variance for 19 Elmwood Place, where the appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.03.11, section A1, to allow a 2-foot setback where 5 foot is required.
Seconded.
All right. All those in favor of granting this variance request, raise your hand.
There we go.
We have 5 votes to 0, none in opposition, so you have your variance.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Get Westy to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do I step off because I'm not?
We'll, let me introduce her first. Our next case on the agenda tonight is case 24-08V at 4 Dalton Avenue. The appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.08.01A to allow parking in front of a structure where it is not permitted, and ACC 23.03.10 to allow more than one principal structure on a lot where only one is permitted. So before we, I guess, start the discussion, Paul Isherwood is going to recuse himself
Yeah.
from this case. And so, yeah, I think he doesn't have to leave the room. I think just stepping
Yeah.
down is fine, yes.
I'm an adjoining property owner, so it's not.
So we'll have 4 members voting on this and not a full caseload of 5, which is normal. And the appellant has agreed to let us hear the case with less than 5, the 4 in this case, that can vote on it. And the detail is that to pass, we have to have 3 positive votes. And so only 1 can dissent tonight for this to be approved. All right, Director Riggs, will you please give us your profile of this case?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is actually 2 Dalton and 4 Dalton combined. The appellant has 2 primary structures on one lot, as well as 2 accessory structures in the back. This was the old ODNR site, so it never did meet the requirements for the City of Athens zoning code. The request is to allow 2 primary structures to be used on this lot. Historically, there've been 2 primary structures and 1 has remained vacant. They would like to have these 2 primary structures where both are occupied, and they would also like to allow on-site parking in front of the structure, which is not permitted by our code.
Okay, did you say ODNR, was it, I thought I've heard it's Wayne National Forest formerly.
May have been, yeah.
I think it was Wayne,
Yeah.
built in
It might have been Wayne
1935.
National Forest, which is pretty crazy to think Wayne National Forest headquarters was in the middle of
Headquarters there,
Athens.
yeah.
And they moved out in 33 towards Nelsonville.
I thought it was ODNR.
All right, any questions for Director Riggs? So we've occasionally had requests for parking in front of structures. Usually it was in a situation where you couldn't fit a driveway in because the lot was narrow, something to that effect. I guess we'll hear the details about this case from the appellant. I don't know what the restrictions are that require the parking in front. And the multiple structures, so is it one large parcel for the whole thing, but it's two addresses? How does that work?
Yes, yeah, it's pretty unusual. It's one structure, or one parcel with two structures on it, two separate addresses. And I believe they may even have two separate water meters now, because they used to be just one water meter for the whole lot, but I think they've split that off. I don't know if is that correct? Yeah.
So do you know the history of why it was just one house was always occupied and one was empty, or was it?
Maybe we can get the appellant to answer the kind of
Yeah,
questions.
I could, if you like.
You know some of it? Okay.
They've not, previous owners have wanted to use one and rent out the other house, and we have not allowed that because it's not permitted in our code to be able to have two occupied structures on one lot. So there's been requests before.
So the house was built?
Prior to the zoning code, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So if this lot would be capable of being split into two lots and they would make it legitimate?
Correct.
So it could be, but that's not what's being requested
That's
here
not
today.
what's being
Correct.
requested,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
There are other buildings on the property. Those are not residential. They're storage or garages or something to that effect,
Accessory
right?
structures.
Accessory structures, and those, no issue with those, right?
No.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Riggs?
The history of not parking in front of the house?
Yeah,
The code?
Yeah, they don't, historically, we've had some rental properties where they end up parking in front of the house, and the city enacted years ago code to restrict that. So if you have a driveway, you're allowed to stack park on the driveway, but you can't move over and park in front of the house, like widen the driveway behind the curb and park over there, because it had happened so much that they actually restrict that in the code now.
Okay. Thanks.
All right, at this time, I'd like to invite the appellant or the representative to please approach the podium, provide any pertinent testimony, or give reason why the request should be viewed favorably by the board.
Thank you.
And make sure you introduce yourselves.
David Funk.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to spend a little bit of history just to provide the context for this somewhat unique location there.
Thank you.
So this is, it was the original Hocking Valley Ranger Station, which became Wayne National Forest. On the right-hand side is Fort Dalton. You can see the parking in front. So all the way back in 1935, the structures were built. Fort Dalton was a ranger home, and you had barns behind it. This is 2 Dalton, the one on the left. So they've historically, since 1935, been there with separate addresses, 2 and 4 Dalton. They have been occupied, but probably not for the last 15 to 20 years. We're going to see in a moment that 4 Dalton fell into pretty bad disrepair. And so the former owner, as you can see on the right, what a beauty. That's 4 Dalton, and some leaks and no maintenance and no caring for the site led to that. There was an outcry 5 or 6 years ago for us to step in and renovate it. So as soon as we had, the conveyance and the right to do that, we immediately renovated the outside of the building to get rid of the eyesore. And so it's taken us a while as a nonprofit. We move very slowly. unfortunately. This spring, we got a call from Kelly Roeder. She's the incoming events coordinator at Ohio University. And she, like many people coming to Athens, was desperate for a single-family home. She's a single professional, was very desperate to be in a neighborhood like the East End. And I guess we're a softie for that kind of pitch. So in March, we said, yeah, we can get it finished and have it ready for you in June. Our intent was, what our understanding was, is that we renovate it, call for an inspection, get the inspection, and have a rental permit issued. We had gotten a building permit, and the notion was that that's what we need to do. We were caught off guard by the realization that you could have a building permit but still not have the right to use the structure that you intended to. So that's my bad. We were working right up to the last second. She shows up. Our plan was to call for a rental inspection, and that's when we learned about the need to appear for a variance. 2 primary structures on one lot. So 2 lessons learned. We've got to quit trying to be so accommodating for people coming into town, and 2 structures on 1 primary lot. So a large part of the confusion was about the building permit. We've got that now. We had submitted plans for exactly what you see. Some considerations for what we're doing here is we very much consider this a historic site. In fact, one of Athens' more important historic sites. It's 2.2 acres. Ranger house and ranger office in the front, 2 Wayne National Forest barns in the back. And our intent from the get-go, and requiring it from the previous owner, was to renovate and restore to the historic structure that was there. And eventually we're going to get around to the barns in the back, painting them as they were back in 1935. So this colors our whole approach with 2 and 4 Dalton. Not simply having rentals, but having it as a contiguous 2.2 acres as a historic site. So since some considerations, since 1935, it's had 2 addresses, it's had 2 homes. It was occupied up until 15, 20 years ago when he let it deteriorate, as you saw. We felt like we were very much responding to a community need and restoring it. We restored it to its identical structure that it was in 1935. There it is today. And so it's fully renovated today. We feel that 4 Dalton is fully in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. It doesn't stand out as a larger structure or smaller structure. In fact, it seems like it's always fit there in the neighborhood. Provides desperately needed housing for Athens, as we all know. It doesn't add to undue density. In fact, the variance we're requesting is only 2 unrelated, family or 2 unrelated, less than what you typically see in an R1. And a variance simply returns it to what it was as recently as 1980s, and that is 2 structures that are habitable on 1 lot. I get the impetus for not having 2 structures on 1 lot. The idea is you don't want a normal city lot, people cramming 2 structures on it. This is 2.2 acres. Yes. You don't see that every day. It's not an attempt to violate the spirit of the notion of 2 primary structures on 1 lot. And then, again, ultimately, we view it as a historic site. We brought in Amish wood that we got from Chester Hill, identical structure to the way it was before. And a lot of what we do is historic preservation. So this is right in our bailiwick. This is the parking out front. So as you saw in that first picture, that's the way they designed it, to be able to park right in front. That bush is gone. It's 3 spots. We are asking to, grant the variance of what it was originally placed there for, is parking in front of the home. And then it's fully our intent to, eventually, once we get everything renovated, to get permission for a sign out front and put up a historic site of the original Wayne National Forest.
questions for the appellant?
So I got a question for Riggs. So with the parking being there since the 30s, 40s, 50s, 80s, the zoning has changed for that type of parking, correct?
Oh, yeah, so the zoning, the original zoning for the city of Athens, it became established in 1960, I believe. So this was in there, 15 years before we even had zoning regulations. So that parking was there before there were any zoning codes, any requirements to not allow that type of parking in the front.
And since we're on that subject, it does seem strange to me that a parcel this large was zoned R1. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It had 2 buildings on it that were occupied.
Yeah.
Probably at the time the zoning was implemented, and yet it was designated as R1. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it's actually located in the middle of a older subdivision, so it's just like, it's kind of an odd place where they originally had it. I don't know what the idea was when it was originally developed, but you had this big lot that was left completely surrounded by single-family residential. So I could understand why they would want that to eventually. So your zoning, when you put zoning in already existing structures, it's where you want that property to go, right? So you wouldn't put, if you didn't want a commercial or an industrial in the middle of a residential, you'd zone it R1, and then as people tried to develop that, you'd have to meet those R1 zoning. So it makes sense to me that they would paint that whole area as R1, even though you're correct, it does not fit what's actually out there.
All right, anyone else have questions for the appellant?
So this for Riggs. Is there any other property like this in Athens with like one parcel but 2 addresses?
Yes, we actually have. We're just working with one on Walker and West State Street, where right next to the Arts West. We just behind Arts West, to the west of that building, are 2 houses with on one lot, and one of them has never, again, just like this one of them had never been occupied. So they only had one occupation, but there were 2 primary structures on that with 2 separate addresses. One had a Walker address and the other had a West State Street address. So yeah, there's probably more. So that's probably not unique for the city of Athens.
There's certainly plenty of other examples of accessory dwelling units. So in this case, 2 residential units on R1 zones. There's a lot of grandfathered in my neighborhood in particular. Yep. But still, this is a little different than that, really. All right, any other questions for the appellant? All right, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of this request?
Yes.
Approach the podium and just introduce yourself.
Keith Chapman, 40 Euclid Drive. And I've just got a little statement I'd like to read, but what I'd say before that, I grew up in the neighborhood. I played in this, and I'm a couple years old, so I've been around a long time, and I know a lot of history. I know a lot of, so if there are any actual questions you want to know from somebody that played there, 50, 60 years ago, I can answer those. So I'm Keith Chapman. I live at 40 Euclid Drive, directly across the street from the property. I'm here today to offer my support for granting the variance necessary for this building to be occupied, and I believe the very specific and narrow nature of this request is the minimum necessary. The appropriate variance should be to permit 2 homes on the property while clearly leaving the status of the other buildings on their property unchanged, resulting in 1 lot with 1 primary residential unit and 4 existing accessory structures, one of which has a variance to be occupied. In closing, I would also like to share that I've discussed this with many other residents in the neighborhood just as walking around, and there's favorable support to get this occupied. And part of it that is, some of the things I could talk about is like the parking. When that was built, Well, this wasn't in the city limits until I think the 80s when it was annexed. It was federal property, so it was not the city. And this property plus part of the lot behind it was brought into the city at that time. And before that, I think it had, even at that point, had 2 residences. When it was built, it was an office on the right, didn't have a kitchen. I used to go in there as a kid just to pester them because I lived 50 feet away. And there's a residential unit on the left. And it was, it's a great place. It's a wonderful place to grow up in the pine trees in the back. And, love to see it there. It's a complicated property, and I guess the real reason I'm up here talking is that I think that the appropriate variance is one that is focused on not making it complicated as 2 primary structures, because that doesn't fit the code. 1 primary and 1 variance to be occupied, does. I just hope for the future there's no complication of not defining it well enough to know for future development, because there's a lot of land there, and if something happens. And if you want to hear any more of my life story, go ahead and ask.
Which house did you live in?
I was on Charles Street. Right now, I live right across from number 2, and in one of the older houses in the neighborhood that was built not long after. The picture he showed was basically from the street in front of my property, and so I have one of the earlier houses, a small cape that was built there, and I grew up on Charles, just across the street from the house abutting that property. So I was there the whole time, and it was my playground, and I loved it. It's a beautiful place. And it's nice to see that building redone. It was sad when, had a fire and water damage, and it just got completely destroyed. So, getting it back, and the neighbors want this to happen. But they also want it to stay, within the nature of the neighborhood too, which is a complicated thing to do. And this is the way to do it.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Would anyone else like to speak in favor of the request? Anyone wishing to speak in general comment?
Alan Swank, 40 Townsend Place. Unlike the older gentleman who just spoke, I've only lived in the neighborhood 41 years. Couldn't resist, Keith. I don't know if you can do this or not, but there are actually 2 requests here tonight. One is for the parking, which I am very, very, very much in favor of. Get the cars off the street. Dalton is a very narrow street. There's no way you could possibly park cars on Dalton for that property, which would force you onto, yeah, and the way the 2 driveways are there, you're a long way down the street. But Mr. Sauber brought up an interesting point, or asked a question. And what I'm wondering, of a general nature, would a lot split be a cleaner way to do this? And in talking with code, I got that impression it would be. So I think perhaps we might want to hear from Director Riggs as to how the lot split process might work, and if one might be more desirable or cleaner than the other, still being able to have 2 structures in this area, in an area where we badly need homes. You put a house on the market on the Far East Side. In fact, the house I lived in, we bought in 1983 for $41,000. If you do inflation today, that house should have listed for $130,000. 3-bedroom, 1-bath, sold last week in one day for $273,000. We need housing in this area, and I very much support an additional house. But I would like to have Director Riggs share with us what a lot split might involve.
So we have looked at whether a lot split would function here, and that was one of the options the appellant had, was to do a lot split, since I believe there's 2 different meters, there's 2 different utility connections. If you basically split the property vertically, or to the north and south, you'd have 1 primary structure with 1 garage or accessory structure. You'd have just 2 Dalton. The one on the other side would be 4 Dalton with an accessory structure behind it. I believe they meet all of the setbacks. They meet the lot size. They meet the all the criteria. I think there may be one building that would have to double check to see that it meets the minimum side yard setback, but even then, it's grandfathered, so it's there, right? So lot split, in my opinion, would actually be the preferable way to do it, because this way you're not in violation of any of the codified or city codified zoning code. You do a lot split and you've got two separate properties, then you could sell one and keep the other. That's always the issue when you have multiple primary structures. You can't sell one. You have to sell them both at the same time. So.
Interesting. So we're here because the appellant has requested this approach.
This approach, yes.
Which is a variance, two variances. And I guess they must have had their reasons for choosing that. I guess that could be a backup plan. If you'd like to approach and answer that question, sure.
I agree with our neighbor. It's best as proposed with a variance. We are very genuine about this as historic site. In a weird way, a split long after I'm gone maybe gives the incentive to sell a part off, and you start diminishing it as a historic site. There's a real commitment to keeping it as it was, 2.2 acres, Wayne National Forest historic site. So I don't want to entertain. From a code office perspective, yeah, a split makes sense when you're within that type of administrative decision making, but this is unique and we really don't want to pursue a lot split.
All right, anyone else wishing to speak in general comment? How about, feel free to approach the podium and introduce yourself, name and address, please.
So Laura McKnight, I live at 37 Euclid, which is adjacent or close to adjacent to the property in question. I just have some concerns. One concern that I have, and I hope that when the motion is read into record, that it's made very clear to this gentleman that the two other structures on the lot are maintained as storage facilities and not renovated and rented out. And the reason I say this is because despite the fact that he claims that he knows that no variance was needed, it was a year ago, about the same time, that he came to request a variance to add a daycare center at the top of this residential neighborhood. So I believe that he knew a variance was needed, and he allowed a poor renter to enter into a lease agreement for an unpermitted building. My concern is this poor person has been unhoused in Athens while housed in one of his other rentals, and not allowed to be in the house that her furniture is in, that her belongings are in. And he knew this, and she didn't until the day she moved in. I just want to make sure that when a motion is read, that it's made very clear that this is too residential and not to be made into any other improvements that are beyond painting of the buildings that are being clearly used as garages or storage facilities.
Thank you. I think any other uses there would have to have a further variance or zoning change, even potentially, right? Okay. Is there anyone who would wish to speak in opposition? Did I already say that? Yeah, that was general comment still, right? So anyone wish to speak in opposition to this? Seeing none, we'll close the floor and the board will deliberate. All right. Thoughts, comments?
Mr. Riggs, are there additional locations that additional structures could be split off and built on that same property? Accessibility, driveway space?
There are other ways to develop this, yeah. So you could split it into multiple lots, because it's such a big parcel right now.
Right.
I think There was some plans to break it into 4 separate lots, one for each of those structures. Except we talked about splitting it down the middle. So yeah, there's different ways to do this. Once you approve this variance, it goes with the property. It's not the property owner that has this. The property now has that variance if you choose to approve that. So any changes that they would need to make, I guess they could still do like a four lot split, split it out into 4s, or even do even do something different inside of the zoning code, rather than leave it as two primary structures.
So to go back to the last comment, we approved this. What would have to happen if they decided to add another home in the back, or a garage with a home on top, like some of the homes are in the east side and around town? Would they have to come back for another variance, or could they just go ahead and add a garage on top, apartment on top of the garage that's already there?
Yeah, like I said, it's not as clean when you do a variance like this on what happens afterwards. It's just not as clean situation.
Would this be something we have to mention in the variance about the restrictions of that variance, of not allowing, a third structure to be built on the lot, since we're looking at approving an accessory structure? Because it kind of falls into what some of the lots have with the garage homes.
Yep.
Like the east side, a lot of garage homes on top.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty hard when you're trying. This is just my opinion, but I think it's difficult to figure out all the things that somebody could do, and make sure that you account for each one of those. You're always gonna miss something. So it's just a lot more difficult to do it that way. You give it the old college try, though.
But it seems like adding even if they convert one of the existing structures to another residential, that triggers another variance request.
Mm-hmm.
Triggers the what? Sorry?
Another variance request?
Yeah,
Unless
just like we're seeing here.
unless they split it into lots.
Well, this
That
property came up
point
last
unless they
spring. This property was in front of us last spring for another structure to be developed.
Yep.
Right.
This was,
Which was discussed.
This was on a case last May.
And I don't remember exactly what the variance was on that, but it was a daycare in one of the garages, right?
Yep.
And that, I think it was because there's no daycares allowed in R1 zones.
That was our
City,
position. Yes.
Did you ever have a point of,
Yeah, hold it. We've closed the floor unless we're going to ask specific questions of anybody in the audience. We've closed the floor for now. Hold on.
well, it doesn't sound like because you're over here.
This is us deliberating. We can still talk to Mr. Riggs. We can still talk to the audience members if we request you. But we've closed the floor, though.
We request.
So, where was I? So I guess one of my comments is that it's almost like we're granting a zoning variance to make this an R2. It's sort of a similar kind of approach here. It's 2 addresses. We're saying it's okay to put 2 structures on it. It's almost like it's an R2 zone without the split.
Right.
So it seems pretty minimal here to
But when
me.
the case was made of what if putting something else on the lot, and that's what the last conversation was on the floor, was what stops from other development happening with the 2 other structures that's there, or as living structures versus keeping them a storage or garage unit. So that's the dilemma with there's 4 structures on the property, correct?
Yeah.
4 structures there.
So it'd be a change of use and adding, I mean, it's still another variance. So it's not that they can't do anything they want in those buildings.
And at that point, they would probably want to split the property anyways.
If it came to that.
If it came
I
to
think.
that.
And the current owner obviously does not seem to have that intention. Do we want to ask that question of him?
Floor back up?
Bring the appellant back up and
Floor back up?
to, well, just for the appellant at this point.
One at a time.
To address that question, future use. You've, I think, made it sort of clear, but why don't you restate and
Yep.
add? if you'd like.
And I do want to respond to the last comment. I was not aware that I had to go through the
And,
BCA.
I should have given you the opportunity to reply, so I didn't do that, thank you.
What actually happened a year ago was a woman wanted to start a child care academy on this site at one of the back barns. She brought the variance request, and that was not for this home, that was for the barn. The neighborhood was not for it. It wasn't me. I thought she had a great idea. But it was turned down. As I've said, we view this as a historic site, exactly it is. Two rental homes on the front, barns in the back that we want to renovate. If we wanted to do something else, it'll have to be a variance. We'll be right back here, and the neighborhood is very vocal that they don't want anything other than what you see here. So we'd be back to square one if we wanted to do anything else there. We don't have that intention.
Basically, my question is, what's stopping turning these barns into some other accessible structure for business, which you can't put there, but living structure or something else?
It'd have to be a variance.
Yeah.
She learned that last
Right.
year.
Well, we just had to make sure.
Or a
that
zoning
it's
change
in-
or.
Yeah, we gotta make sure that it's gonna be in the variance for the associated structure that you're requesting now, that you can't use other structures.
Yeah,
Because this is pretty big for that board, no?
to clarify, the variance is for the property to have 2 residential structures. That could mean that they could renovate one of the back ones, use 2 of those, use the original one and one of the back ones as residential, and not use the one that they just renovated as a residential. Like, any of the 4 structures on the property could technically be residential with this variance.
We
Just
would
2
be-
of them. If they want to make a 3rd or a 4th, they would have to get
Come
a
back.
further variance and come back for that.
We would be
Which building?
fine if you wanted to narrow it to, we are only requesting the 2 front
That's what we need to.
That sounds like a
Yeah.
reasonable.
Right.
That's what we.
And the wording is more than one principal.
Yeah, we need to
So,
specify it.
so it could become all 4 potentially with this wording. For primary or principal residence. With the wording as is.
So, when we get to that point, does someone have the idea, or what's the wording we need to use? It's the term for restriction we're putting on.
Well, since we have the
variance.
floor open, I think before we get into that.
Yeah, we're not getting there yet.
Right. I think we should open up, since the floor is open, I think Mr. Swank should be allowed to speak.
Okay, we can do that.
Alan Swank, 40 Townsend Place. Hopefully my vision can read this. A very careful reading of the case says appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.08.01A to allow parking in front of a structure where it is not permitted. That's pretty clear, and I think just about everybody in this room thinks that's a great idea. And ACC 23.03.10 to allow more than one principal structure on a lot where only one is permitted. 2 is more than one, 3 is more than one, 4 is more than one. This opens the door to whatever can fit in and would not require another variance.
Correct.
Yeah.
That was my
Correct.
comment. With the 2 garages. I just remember, I wasn't here for that meeting last year, but I do remember trying to put a daycare center or nursery or something in that area. So this, if we approve that more than one, then I can open that for that
Yeah.
Right.
later.
We need to specify or add a
It needs to be
condition.
only one or.
So-
And that was the intent. Sorry about
Yeah. What real question to Riggs is, with 4 Dalton, does that count that garage in the back as 4 Dalton?
That would be, yeah, you would have, yeah, you'd have 2 primary structures and 2 accessory structures on this lot. So it doesn't matter, you don't have 4 Dalton with one structure and 2 Dalton with the other. It's all on one lot.
Those are just words, they're just names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to specify.
So
It's
then,
semantics.
what we'd be doing here is specifying a condition of this variance request, right? And we specify what that condition is, so somebody's got to be able to articulate that. So
If we get to that,
if we get that, we'll work on
I just want to continue with
work
that.
on that. So if you'd like to step forward again, please.
Yeah, Keith Chapman again. That was kind of sort of what I was trying to bring into the discussion about, which one thing, a correction, there are 5 structures on the property, unless one's been taken down recently. There is a small garage that doesn't seem to be addressed. It's behind what's called 2 Dalton. So there's 5. My thought was wording that would allow, just really to put a stamp what is allowed, what was allowed when it was brought into the city. And that's, by code, it's brought in as R1, that's mandated, then it would be changed after that if needed. And by code, if you annex it, they're allowed to keep the uses they had. And so they were allowed to occupy 2 structures. You know, the 2 and 4 gets, I mean, that's the post office mostly. I mean, they can take your number, I gave you one, pretty much. Now you work with the safety services. But, so that, my thoughts, if we keep it clear that it is one primary structure, because that's sort of by definition primary, and then we have the other 4 auxiliary structures, and that one specific one would be what we're addressing the variance for. So it's not going to be potentially moved or additional done. And we're kind of giving them back to that point in time when it was brought in. Because, you know, people driving by think it's stupid to see an empty house, you know, and the split has been sort of a long-term. There was also a planning commission split that was sort of almost approved on the property a number of years ago. Some of the language in it didn't follow the code, so it couldn't be fulfilled because it was about access at the time. A driveway was going to be required, and it was a minor split that was granted or verbally voted for, but they required another driveway built, which a minor split cannot demand such changes to the property. Minor splits when there's just 2 very clean, you can draw a line. So I mean, it's got its problems, it's got its things to go, but I would think, if you think it's appropriate, that, you know, something crafted that is specific could be done, and any changes to that variance, one property, would trigger the loss of the variance. They're going to enlarge it, you would lose the variance. They're going to enlarge either, so put it to a point, and that's fine. That's just what he's asking for. That's what I was going to say. What he's asking for as a neighbor sounds good. And I think with the proper language that could be handled. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the biggest thing is the verbiage of allow more than one principal structure.
Do we wish to close the floor, Rob?
Yeah, I was just waiting a moment to do that. Do we have any other questions for the appellant? Hate to open it again.
It's doable.
Okay, so I'll close the floor again. Thank you for the input we got. Any other questions for Mr. Riggs about this? I think we should go through our questions. We can continue discussion after this if we need to. So are there exceptional circumstances for this property? It's a big parcel in the middle of a residential zone. It's odd that it's, in a way, it's odd to me that it's zoned in R1.
I don't see anything exceptional. I mean, a lot split would be clean, it would be easier. We wouldn't have to take another hour to come up with proper verbiage that would try to save the code as it was meant.
That's what I was thinking for the minimum variance question. I don't think that this is the minimum variance if they split the lot. That would avoid.
But they
There is
don't-
another route to take.
There is another
Is it-
route.
But they don't plan on splitting the lot.
Yeah.
So I think it is a minimum, another question here, minimum variance probably because the route they're choosing, which is up to the property owner. The city can't force them to split the lot.
Yeah.
It's the property owner's decision what to do. We could deny this variance and then they might be forced to split the lot, but potentially.
Well, if we could accept one of the variances and not the other. The parking variance could be allowed as is.
So it's interesting, the appellant gave some background for us about answering these questions and the exceptional circumstances, they really didn't give a good answer. So I guess case in point, that may be a weakness here. How about practical difficulty and undue hardship? Conditions pertaining to a specific piece of property, literal enforcement of these regulations result in practical difficulty. Practical difficulty, you can only have one occupied structure on this property when there are multiple residential structures.
Primaries, yeah.
Undue hardship unnecessary to the achievement of public purposes, I think, yeah. Preservation of equal property rights. Any special privilege here? It's, the privilege essentially, if depending on how we word this exactly, is almost giving it like an R2 zone approval. Two residential properties on this one R zone parcel. I don't know how many properties in this neighborhood have two residential structures on them.
Two primary structures is the
Yeah.
terminology. So since you've been, your historical knowledge, have we had a request such as this with two primaries for the same piece of property?
Not since I've been here, no.
Okay. So there's no precedent to go off of in that respect?
Yeah, so even then, the things I'm thinking about are where there's a second structure, but it's an apartment or something.
Right.
In the back. It's not a
And that
primary,
side is the garage
not a
with the
primary
apartment.
structure, but it's in a second residential. Okay.
Okay.
I think the,
So we have a good answer on preservation of equal property rights. Literal interpretation of these regulations would deprive the appellant of rights commonly enjoyed by others in the same zone, the same vicinity.
No? You can
Well,
split the property.
maybe not so much. While granting a requested variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that's denied to others. In the same zone, same vicinity.
For the parking, yes.
there's no other.
For the parking.
Yeah.
For the parking, I think, is reasonable.
Yeah, for parking, I would say yes. For the other, no.
Oh, right, wait, two things.
Right, there are two variances, correct?
Yeah,
Being requested.
okay.
Okay. So who wants to, any motions being wished to be
Minimum
made?
variance, well, let's finish. Minimum variance, we talked about that. I think it is sort of minimum because it's a variance. If we use lot split, it's not a variance, so I think it's the minimum thing we can actually do. Absence of detriment, we haven't heard of any detriment here. Anyone, in fact, we've heard neighbors talking about how this would be good for the neighborhood and for improving, increasing housing stock in Athens. So I think there is no absence of, there is an absence of detriment.
I think the only discussion was the other two units being developed
Structures.
later.
If it went down some rabbit hole, right, some
Right.
Yeah.
future use.
Right.
Not of a general nature. No, it's a pretty, I think, specific situation here. There's probably nothing like this anywhere else in Athens. Okay, so are we ready to propose a motion?
I think to make a motion, we need to make sure that we are to to allow, say allow more than one principal, to allow,
Only one additional,
yeah.
to allow only two, I'm not sure of the right wording.
I'm going to say that if I were to make the motion, I would make a motion to allow the parking variance and deny as worded the other variance. That would be my motion.
Are you making said motion?
I am not. I am not. We're still debating and having our discussion.
The parking is fine, but we just gotta look at making sure that other pieces that's in that lot don't get turned into apartments or
Yeah.
a childcare center or something else.
Would you support even if it had a condition to have two principal
Is
structures?
it our place to write the conditions for them?
So how can we, what would be the best way to word this, that it only, we're just getting variance to those two homes for living and not allowing the back garages to look like the east side with apartments on top? I'm not saying that will happen anytime soon, but it will stay with the property. So if he sold the property, somebody come in and say, oh yeah, this is a lot of land, we see the variances here.
Yeah.
I would try something like, just specifically say the property, the structure at 4 Dalton to be allowed to be a secondary primary structure on one lot and not allow any residential or commercial use in the, on the accessory structures, maybe something like that. So state it, yeah.
I'm just looking down the road at,
Yeah.
because this variance stays with this property. So
Yep.
a year from now or 2 years from now,
10, 50, yeah.
right, somebody say, oh yeah, let's build condos in the back. It's already a variance for it.
Yeah, right.
Because there's space there for it, so.
Yeah.
All right, so Kelly, it sounds like if you were to propose a motion, it would be different than that. We have either of you that would like to propose a motion, decide what we should do here. I assume we can't really break this into two different motions. It needs to be one motion for both.
One for the case. We just need to make a motion to make sure only the front two homes are allowed as primary structures. And
Yeah.
not the
To allow-
accessory structures.
To allow no more than two principal structures on a lot where only one is permitted.
Yeah.
So, you have the wording?
There you go.
want me
got
to
the
say it?
word. There we go.
But what was the second?
But we need to verify the accessory structures. to
Yeah,
make sure.
that's the part that I'm missing. They say that they cannot be principal structures? To remain as accessory structures?
Yeah, so that, yeah, I would say something like that the accessory structures not be residential or commercial use.
Okay.
I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure
Yeah.
those
Would
stay.
you like to make that motion?
Okay.
Well,
Go ahead, Colin.
and still specifically mention a primary with a secondary primary, and that's the extent on this piece of property.
Yeah, two
You were
principal
saying-
structures on a lot where only one is permitted. And two accessory structures that cannot
To
be used
remain.
as residential or
Say
commercial.
any, may I say any accessory structure?
Yeah.
Or
Oh, yes, any,
Any
yeah.
accessories. So, yes,
Okay.
see, that's the can of worms that is the concern, is because we would have to try to think through every potential thing to concern ourselves
Yeah,
with.
yeah.
Whereas they could split the property and it would solve this problem without ever seeing us again, honestly.
The home is not, the two homes isn't the issue, it's what can happen
Correct.
Yeah.
with the rest of the
Yeah.
1.5 acres.
If granted as
Right.
written, yeah.
Right.
Right.
Okay, I'll make a motion if everyone is,
Yeah.
okay. Okay, I'm gonna make a motion, for case 24-08V for 4 Dalton Avenue, where the appellant is requesting a variance from ACC 23.08.01A to allow parking in front of a structure where it is not permitted, and AC 23.03.10 to allow no more than two principal structures on a lot where one is permitted, and no accessory structures be used for commercial or residential purposes.
Okay, we have a second.
I'll second.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion before we take a vote? normally don't, but. All
So
set?
I think
We're ready to vote?
I think it's good for the books, right?
good.
This is, just want to make sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so all in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, same sign. Okay, vote is 3-1, so you have your variances. All right. Other business.
June minutes.
So yes, disposition of minutes from June 11th, 2024. There were 5 in attendance. Kelly, Alicia, and I were in attendance. The other 2 members are not here. So we do have 3 of us, which is what we need to pass anything, including approving the minutes. So any questions or issues, adjustments to the minutes anybody saw?
I did not.
All right, someone like to propose a motion to approve the minutes?
I was on here, so I can't approve.
You're not.
I will motion to approve the Board of Zoning Appeals minutes from June 11th, 2024.
Thank you. I'll second that. I think I can do that as chair.
Sure. Otherwise, I will.
All those in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand. Yes, 3-0. They're approved. All right, so that concludes the business of the Board of Zoning Appeals today. Thank you very much for your participation.
All right.
Thank you.